Alison.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and also to Fidge and Aileen for all the tech that you're doing in the background. And on a day like today, I can't think of a better company of people to be speaking with and listening with and sharing with. It's been a hard day. I know it's been hard because Robert Swinfen bought me flowers. And this has maybe happened 5 times in our marriage. So it's a real symbol of something. Maybe I should be grateful to the Home Secretary for that, but I will maybe spare that a little. I'm going to start off by also responding to the Sandra Kramer voice in my head, and actually read you from this book of poetry that I wrote with my colleague at the University of Glasgow, Tawana Sitole, who is from Zimbabwe originally. And it's a poem, a couple of you may have heard this before. I've used it with Christian Aid resources, but it's about the tricky listening that I have done to myself, to the past, to the land that I live on, and ways of trying to work through what that means and think with those questions that Ruth has invited us to consider about who is not in the room and how we might speak with ourselves about that and with one another. My name is Alison, and I am a recovering racist. I was born with this addiction because my ancestors were white, and the country I am from grew fat in every imperial fight. Money, privilege, and power come down the barrel of a gun. That wasn't just in history, it's still how this is done. The work which calls me loudly towards your skins and eyes and tears is the work which is intention to assuage those birthright fears. So do not idolize my actions. Do not praise my words as bold. Do not look at my intentions or the papers that I hold. The thoughts I have of charity are just part of this addiction, inherited from a line that is a long and bleached out fiction. I do not have to worry when my skin is in a room or on a plane or in a car or in the immigration tomb. I will be given space and money and more time because I'm white, because my ancestors were slave owners or slave drivers and right. While you, my friends, my kindred, will be skinned another way, flayed into diminishments through ever greater punishments and all those cruel admonishments. For the only proper meaning of a white man's burden is that for all my days, commitment will be to a healing labour. On my deathbed, in my dying, I will be a racist too. But it's shouldering the burden that can lead to something new, something giving and forgiving, of the shame upon my skin, something real and raw and honest that can live with history's sin. Not denial of what sticks to every tone or shade or pore, but the making of relationships that brim with something more. At times, our conversations will make our skins dissolve, and around us through the laughter a new world may revolve, when the tears are all that join us and the skin gives way to bone, and through the pain we'll love again and call one earth our home. I wrote that back in 2016 on a plane between Wellington and Melbourne in Australia. And it was literally as the 45th President of the United States was being elected to power. The next day, I was giving a civic lecture in Adelaide in South Australia. And I realized that there would be a large group of people wanting answers from me as to how this had happened, how somebody could be elected to power with views that we had and have repeatedly said are abhorrent, stand in place of all that might be held sacred with regard to human dignity, and which are and did during those 4 years of his presidency violate the Refugee Convention. Today in the House of Commons, the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom effectively announced the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the Refugee Convention and the refusal to allow people the right to seek asylum. In Article 1 of the 1951 Convention, the Refugee Convention, which the UK signed into law itself in 1951, it says that owing to a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable, or owing to such fear is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country, or who, not having a nationality and being outside the country of his former habitual residence as a result of such events, is unable, or owing to such fear is unwilling to return to it. According to international law, everyone who satisfies this definition is a refugee. Now, the convention has been subject to a great deal of critique, and a great deal of legal ink has been spilled on it, and it has been subject to a great deal of interpretation by nation states around the world, where all kinds of aspects of these definitions have been tested, and often tested to the limits. It's lovely to know that some of our friends and fellow travellers are here from Australia, where in many ways the practice of detention on Manus Island and Nauru, and the detention of people who had claimed asylum having arrived in Australia by boat, is something of a precursor to what we saw unfold in the UK Parliament today. It effectively takes us out of that convention and denies people the right to claim asylum. The right to asylum in Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says this, and it's really interesting wording. It says everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. I'm just going to read it again. Everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. Now, of course, this is how the definition is couched in law, but it's an old understanding and an old definition, and it goes back into the Hebrew Bible and into the founding of cities of refuge. It goes back into the commandment to take care of the stranger at the gate. It goes back deeply into understandings of what constitutes hospitality, and it goes into understandings of economy that is based on gift, and that is based on a notion that I have been given and asked to share with you by Indigenous friends and fellow travellers from Aotearoa, New Zealand, where in recent times I've spent quite a bit of time as a visiting professor, where they talk about the concept of manaakitanga. Manaakitanga. Manaakitanga we translate as hospitality, but actually if you break the word down, that's not really what it means. It really comes from mana aki, and mana aki is talking about the duty to have your own and other people's worth and dignity enhanced through the practice of good, enjoyable offers of sanctuary and hospitality to others. And that this is a serious business and requires serious effort, and it requires it to be looked at with a good deal of diligence, and without either the offer willy-nilly, without forethought, without preparation, without care, and also without greed and without self-protection and without hoarding, and by enacting a myth of your own scarcity. And that if that is practiced, as Māori have helped me understand, if that is practiced well and within that spirit, then the manner, the dignity, the standing, the spirit of every human involved in that practice will be augmented and enhanced. It reminds me quite a lot of the rule of Benedict and the rules of radical hospitality that were practiced in monastic communities. And what they all have in common, and what really brings us to the theme of tonight, is that these are rules which are made for those who are boundary dwellers to the civic space. Because of course the civic space is for citizens, And many of those who we are thinking of tonight, particularly those seeking asylum or sanctuary, or those who have sought refuge and been granted it, remain boundary dwellers outside of the civic space, outside of the rights and protections that many of us will enjoy. And many of those who do eventually come to a place where they can enjoy citizenship in the full sense of the word and are able to exercise rights under taxation and rights under voting that I enjoy as a citizen of the UK, that even after that has happened, they will be subject to all kinds of forms of barrier and boundary that may not be in place legally, but which still make their work very difficult. The barriers that we erect through racism, the barriers that we erect through a requirement on those who seek sanctuary to integrate and become like us in the way that we talk about integration, by which we really mean assimilation. In the requirement that everybody speaks English as well as a native speaker, preferably without accent, that people don't behave in such a way as to make those who live in the land already feel in any way disquieted or uncertain about their own ways of going on, may be made to think that there might be other practices or different practices that could be of equal worth, that might be augmenting of the manner, of the spirit, of the way of being and of the human dignity of everyone. So underneath this right, the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution, are many civic duties on those of us who already enjoy a life that is free from persecution and who have never had to make the journey and attempt to claim asylum in another country. And those people have been in long and sustained conversation with me now for over 17 years, actively through my work, which began with a really interesting moment, actually. Some of you will remember and think of fondly Baroness Williams, Shirley Williams, a former education secretary, one of the Gang of Four, a Liberal Democrat, and who was eventually elevated to the House of Lords. We can have separate discussions about what we think about that. But she used to do the appeal on Radio 4 in the morning for a particular charity. And just after I'd stepped back from being the president of the International Association for Languages and Intercultural Communication in 2003, I was thinking about doing a lot more voluntary work for a while, as I discerned what my next academic work might be and be of best service. And I heard Shirley Williams speaking on Radio 4 on behalf of detainee visitors, those people who go to detention centres and sit in the detention centres with people whose claim to asylum has been refused, who might still be pending appeal, but who have been deemed to be a so-called flight risk and are separated from civic society and become another level of boundary dweller to even those that I mentioned previously. And as she was speaking, I had that feeling, that fire in your bones, that sense that Quakers speak of quaking, of that is my work. I need to do that. So I downloaded the application form and sent it in. And sent it in with a good deal of naivety and a good deal of, I would say, intellectual arrogance, and a good deal of assumptions on my part that here I would be doling out charity, doing a good thing, fulfilling my commitment to the rule of the Iona community, and this would be a great way of really engaging with this. And in particular, because as Professor of Languages, I speak a number of languages fluently, so obviously I was thinking this is something I can offer to people in the space. You know, I can speak French and German, this will be fine. So of course I sit in the visit room for the first time, and I think I have never felt quite so vulnerable, depressed, or incompetent in my whole life. Because of course my languages were useless. I'm a person who is fluent in way too many colonial languages. I grew up in Sheffield during the Entente Cordiale, when the languages to learn were French and German as part of the peace building operations within Europe. Because it was the Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire, I was allowed a couple of classes in Russian. But the languages that I find I need to be able to speak and speak fluently in my day-to-day activities are Arabic, are Pashto, are Tigrinya and Bilen, are Oromo, are languages that are spoken by the majority of people who seek asylum. Are languages which, in the case of my foster daughter, who is herself an Eritrean refugee, are languages for which there are not even primers written yet. They have not yet been codified or turned into forms of grammar that might be useful to someone who's used to the kinds of ways of learning a language that we might be schooled in the West. They belong to radically different and what are often called southern epistemologies or southern forms of knowledge, to oral traditions, traditions which remain remarkably closed to many of us, and yet which are part and parcel of the lives of the majority of people seeking asylum and many people living in the global south. My journey took me from being a detainee visitor and from those moments of real incompetence to learning that actually I needed to learn to listen, and that I needed to humble myself, and I needed to be in a position where integration in a detention centre of me, the vulnerable observer, the vulnerable visitor, the person trying to practice a weird form of hospitality, would actually require me not to be the professor of languages, but to just be Alison, a person upon whom for 1 hour a week, a group of vulnerable asylum seekers could be in the driving seat, and they could teach me to speak words of their own language, to greet, to meet, and to name the vile liquids that came out of the vending machine up in Dungavel Removal Centre. If any of you have ever used that vending machine, you will have real empathy for me at this moment. And so I learned various words in some in languages I didn't even know existed. Various words in different languages, particularly for greeting. And most of the time during those lessons, I would be laughed at and laughed near, because it was just delightful to hear these words that were normally spoken out of black bodies, spoken out of a white body, and words normally spoken by people with very little education or who'd had interrupted education, spoken by a woman who was a professor. And I realized through this something which has been a guiding force for the work that I've been engaged with ever since, that none of this work is possible without deep, repeated, daily commitment to humility and to being humbled by those that we aim to serve. The other thing I did was learn an awful lot about football, because the majority of the guys inside Dungavel were young men and they were mad about football, and really they weren't interested in speaking about much else. And this was their escape, their little moment of being able to tell somebody else about their absolute passion. So at that point, for those years visiting Dungavel, I made sure that I was really closely following the fortunes, particularly of Manchester United. Please don't tell my brother, he's a Sheffield United fan. That work took me on a journey. It made me realise that trying to campaign for the closure of detention centres is one thing, and getting people out of detention centres and getting them to have their appeal heard again is another thing. It's all part of my civic duty, my work in the civic space with boundary dwellers. But actually, once the people had been released from Dungavel Removal Centre, actually, they usually had no recourse to public funds in the UK, no opportunity of actually living with any degree of dignity. They were immediately homeless. And actually, my duty to boundary dwellers was to see if there was a way of providing shelter. So at that point, and well before it became trendy, and thanks to the support of our family group, Robert and I decided to start volunteering with Positive Action in Housing, as many others have done in the community. I think Ian and Isabel are here, and I know Ian and Isabel have done this work for years. Sally Beaumont joined us in that as an act of solidarity, and it's just extraordinary what has come out of these lives that we've lived, sometimes with people who come and go and that's all they want to do, and in our case, with a young woman who became our daughter and has produced 2 beautiful grandchildren for us. Our daughter arrived here by routes which are deemed to be illegal. She was passed from pillar to post, age 14, into the hands of smugglers and traffickers. People tried to find money to keep her as safe as possible. She was put on a boat which sank off Lampedusa. She was rescued by the Italian Coast Guards. Today, she would have been turned back and sent to the torture camps of Libya by the European Union Frontex patrols. She made her way through the chaos of the Italian immigration system at that time. For a while, was housed in a big broken old house, as she calls it, which was a squat. She had sustained severe injury when she was there, and she was enabled to leave by Caritas International and to go to France for medical treatment. And she found herself in the Calais camps. She was in the Calais camps for a while and eventually was strapped into a box under a lorry and came into the country illegally. Today, Priti Patel announced that had she been found, or were she to claim asylum in the UK, as of today, she would be instantly deported. Instantly deported. And she would never have a right of citizenship in this country or even of indefinite leave to remain, both of which are enshrined within the convention. So if this had happened 12 years from when it happened today, there would be no chance of me being a foster mother. There would be no chance of a story of birth to the barren. There would be no chance of a story of grandchildren. There would be no chance of an understanding of some of those biblical passages that I've come to understand in a renewed way about this, so plentiful will be your offspring, and about the extraordinary beautiful ways in which, for me, time and again, through my work with refugees and asylum seekers, the words of the gospel, and particularly the words of the Passion, have, like the road to Emmaus, been broken open for me time and again, and time and again, and time and again. All this week, in your very hearing, these words have come true, and that I've come to know the full joy and the full sorrow of what it means to walk this way which I cannot and would not put down. In my work that has drawn me in and through the academic field I'm in, which is in the work of intercultural studies and in languages, my focus for the last 15 years has been around asylum and refugees, but also, as I've come to a deeper understanding of that, of Indigenous people. Because, of course, refugees are Indigenous to somewhere else in the world. They have a cultural heritage and a story which attaches to them through that land that has been lost and that is then remade again in a different place. My work as UNESCO Chair for Refugee Integration means that I hold the only UNESCO chair, the only UNESCO professorship worldwide that has a focus on refugees. There are about 400 UNESCO chairs in the world, and all of them are attached to articles in the Human Rights Convention: the right to education, the right to housing, many at the moment particularly focused on climate change and climate chaos. All of them have at their heart a focus on justice, and for me, on the work of cultural justice in particular. In my team, which is a large team, we hold a portfolio of grants which until last week totaled round about £24 million for work across the global south in around 25 different countries. And then also very much focused locally and in Scotland. So we try and work horizontally and we try and work vertically. We try and work in ways which mean that we will understand the journeys people have made, where they've come from, and be in solidarity with the majority of the world's refugees, who are all in countries in the global south: Uganda, Turkey, Ethiopia, Kenya, Pakistan, just to name a few of the majority countries. We often say that it's our principle in the work to hold the bowl of tears and expand the space for joy. To hold the bowl of tears and expand the space for joy. We run really regular events, all of which are led by or have participation by asylum seekers and refugees themselves, their families and those they live with. Some of our work has got easier under the pandemic, some of it has got a lot harder. Um, our spaces are spaces of welcome, and they are spaces modelled very much on the rule and the principles of hospitality of the Iona community. In many ways, I see it as, for me, the most tangible expression I know is within the chair and within my team of enacting the spirit of the rule, and particularly of our justice, peace, and integrity of creation commitment. You can find a lot of our work on our website, and I'll pop that up, and you can follow us on pretty much every form of social media. Yesterday we had a sofa session. We just get people to gather together. We say it's not a chair that I hold in the old ancient idea of the chair that a professor might hold, but rather it's a cushion or a stool like this. This is an ancient Adinkra symbol coming from Ghana that my colleagues brought, and you would sit all in a circle and share that space together. So we invite people to come and pull up a cushion, sit cross-legged on the floor, and be part of our circle, and to share on equal terms. First names only, no titles, modelled at times on the Poverty Truth Commission, at times on our work on Iona. Our spring school is a time of utter joy and beauty, a place where we use the traditions that we learnt at Camus of wrapping string around our wrists, and which we've taken all over the world now, to show how we're connected together in common humanity, and to absolutely commit to the work of integration being the work of human integral development, the work where every single one of us, through every encounter we make, with whatever that might be in the world, be it the flowers that Robert brought me today, be it the daughter that turned up on my doorstep, whoever or whatever this might be, that we are changed profoundly by those encounters, because they are times, as Martin Buber says, of the quick of human relatedness. Das Zwischenmenschliche is his word in German. The space between people, the sacredness, the space where we say thou to the other, I, thou, not I, it. So for me, all of this is part and parcel of the principles of my work. It's a hard time just now, and those that I spoke with before I came, particularly one of my Eritrean refugee colleagues, really impressed upon me to advocate on behalf of asylum seekers and refugees, to ask you to pray and to act, to pray and to act. To pray because we are not easily reduced to prayer, as Walter Wink says. And I'm minded of that very much at the moment in a time of real crisis. Last week I was notified that £24 million of the grants that I hold, which are in process, will be terminated by the UK government with probably immediate effect from the end of April. That means that I have 300 people to make redundant. That means those 25 countries no longer benefit from the work we're doing with refugees, particularly with women and girls, and particularly to build safe civic spaces for artists and for young people and for cultural institutions and for libraries or story writing or all of the creative arts that people find solace and refuge in. And so it's really a difficult time, and my colleagues have really asked for prayer. And I was also speaking today with one of the people who is a refugee himself, and who is regularly in meetings with the UK Home Office, and who always asks me to pray before and after he has entered those meetings for protection, because he experiences them as profound places of the perpetuation of evil and of all that is counter to God's laws. I spoke with him today as we understood the full horror of what had been announced in the UK Parliament. To laugh, to cry, to be together, to hold hands on the phone in the way that you might be able to do that, and to commit to dusting ourselves down and continuing to campaign. Because what I know more than anything else is that there is a goodness at the heart of humanity, planted more deeply than all that is wrong. And whilst this is all wrong, make no mistake about it, this is all wrong, I do know profoundly from 15 years of advocacy and of working and of being asked to speak with and on behalf of and to protect others in the most perilous situations, that what we are doing is working. The number of deportations is down. The number of claims that are successful is up. We are able to offer better and better forms of integration. And just this week, I was able to announce that the Scottish Government, together with myself and the Scottish Refugee Council and COSLA, the local authorities network, have been successful in gaining £5 million from the very last residues of a pot of money from Europe, nearly 3 million of which, I think 2.8 million of which, will go directly to support groups working either refugee-led or working with refugees, working for humane, dignified mana aki, humane, dignified hospitality and integration in Scottish society. Scotland had, we think, the world's first ever integration strategy. It's called New Scots. That's the title that people seeking asylum wished to have placed upon them, wished to come under, because it would encompass so many of them and of us to be called New Scots. Through that work of New Scots, we've seen that refugees in Scotland now have voting rights that passed recently in the Scottish Parliament, so that they are able to vote in the elections coming, and were able to vote in the council elections just now. This means that boundary dwellers become citizens amongst us. I'm seeing and encouraging Rosa Salia, who is standing for election to the Scottish Parliament, who was one of the Glasgow girls who started a campaign to stop deportation. I see signs of hope everywhere. And I live in a world that is full of hope daily. There is an alternative reality. It is already present with us. It is being made by the boundary dwellers, those on the margins, those on the peripheries, and it is beautiful, and it is sustaining, and it is nourishing, and it is enough. It is enough. It is enough for all our mutual recovery. My name is Alison, and I'm a recovering racist. And through this work, we'll love again and call One Earth our home. So as well as asking for your prayers, I'd also just like you, as you go into your breakout rooms, to go with 2 questions. And one of them is a question from Eritrean refugees in Glasgow. And they have a phrase that they say regularly. They talk about how bad things are for Eritrean refugees, and for those caught up in the horror of the genocide at the moment. It will be deemed, I think, quite soon to have been a genocide, and in the Tigray region. And where quite a lot of my family, my refugee family, are caught up in that horror right now. And they regularly say, but what can you do? And it's a statement. But they've asked me to turn it back to us as a question, but what can you do? And there is so much you can do, you know, from writing to MPs, to campaigning, to getting involved with a local club that's supporting refugees and asylum seekers, to just informing yourselves and reading stories, reading books written by refugees, or poetry, or watching plays. There is so much out there, even just by looking into the internet and seeing what you can do as a way of getting alongside from wherever you are. And there's prayer. And then the second question is, and who will you get support from in your work to do this when you've chosen what to do? In other words, who for this are your people? It's a question we ask every day in our work when we come across challenges. The first thing we ask, we stop, we pause, we gather, and then we discern. Who for this are my people? Who, when the government cuts 24 million off my work and I have to do this, who are my people? Who instantly are my people? And I had 2 answers to that question, Stuart and Anton. They were my initial people. And from that, it was like water, and there is a major campaign, and it's been possible to sustain the work. Who for this are your people? When Priti Patel makes the announcement that she has done, these people have names, and they're my people. They're my people, and I'm their person. And this is part of the commonwealth of love. And for me, it is a sign of the kingdom of God. So who for you are your people? So 2 questions. What can you do? And who for this are your people? In other words, when you're doing what you'll do, where will you get your support from and your nourishment? Thank you.
Alison, thank you. I think without anything further, we'll move now into our groups, and we'll come back at about 1:15, at which point, if you have comments, questions, thoughts, reflections, put them in the chat, and we'll see how many we can look at by 1:30. So Aileen, I think it's over to you for groups, and you should be able to see this chat when you go into your group.
Okay, there are some unassigned people who have either entered a wee bit later, and I'll just quickly get them into groups, so bear with me. 20. I work with us, so yeah, probably.
So welcome back, one and all, and welcome back, Alison. Do put comments, questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. The focus this evening has been on you being in small groups. We're not looking for feedback from everybody, but we are looking for any reflections or comments you've got. And as they come in, Alison, I just wanted to thank you once again. You have taken me to new levels. I wanted to be able to say, is it Manaki Tanga?
Yeah, Manaki Tanga.
Manaki Tanga. We talk about radical hospitality a lot in the Iona community. You have given me a whole new way of thinking about this, which I really do want to integrate into our way of talking about what we mean by hospitality that changes us and changes all of us, everybody around us. Sacrificial hospitality, but hospitality that makes us, that is dependent on the worth and the dignity of the other. And the notions of sanctuary in there. I wanted to thank you for that. And you, we were talking in our little group about the new light you have thrown onto that well-worn phrase within our liturgies in the community, that there is goodness at the heart of humanity, planted more deeply than all that is wrong. And sometimes when the goodness is taken out, is sucked out, that's when we see more clearly how that goodness is indeed planted at the heart of humanity. Only in its absence do we remind ourselves most powerfully how it's there. And on a day like today, when that goodness has been sucked out of humanity, do we see again how actually it's our place to bring it back and to recognize that it is here. And we who have the civic freedoms are compelled and duty bound to continually remind everybody and ourselves that that goodness is there. So for these and other insights, thank you. So we have Karen and Lynn asking about campaign resources. Lynn and Karen, do you want to say any more about that question? What specifically are you looking for, perhaps? You can join us on the stage, if you like, by spotlighting yourself.
Sorry, just trying to unmute. Thinking about, well, we were both saying, is there a common concern network that we could all kind of gather around? And are there any campaigning resources already there that could be distributed to people to raise the voice, really? That's where that came from.
Yeah, so there are campaign resources, quite a lot of campaign resources around this. I've just popped into the chat accidentally just to Ali and Gillian, but I'll now put it in for everybody. The website for Right to Remain, which is an organisation that Catherine is involved in the Iona community. Robert was the treasurer for 10 years. I was involved with for 8 years. It's been sustained and supported by the community and by community members. It's called Right to Remain, and it has the definitive toolkit for campaigning for the right to remain, and it has been extended to include people who might be at risk of deportation who are European citizens. So there's a lot of resource there. It's the go-to resource for MPs across the country. Right to Remain did trainings with MPs around the country, particularly newly elected MPs, because one of the things that many, particularly in cities, find is that the first thing they discover is that 80% of their caseload is for refugees and asylum seekers, and the fact that they have been denied legal aid, or they're being deported, or their cases aren't being heard, or all kinds of issues and problems that are to do with procedural and administrative justice, and that are just not being followed. So Right to Remain is the toolkit, and it's also available on the website. It's in forms that will easily transfer through very narrow bandwidth into detention centres. And we've done a number of iterations of the toolkit in different languages. So Tigrinya, I think, is recently out. There's Arabic, there's Spanish, and we've been working for many years with different groups to do that. There's also a game that they've produced, the Right to Remain game, which is a bit like a Monopoly board, which includes signs like go straight to detention. But it's a really good resource for learning about how that works. And anybody in Glasgow, myself and Pinar Aksu have a couple of copies each. So if anyone at some point wants to borrow that, they can. But I know Lisa at Right to Remain has been trying to make that, trying to make that also available as an online game that might be played as well. So yeah, Right to Remain is a really good first place. There's also lots on the Refugee Council website. And I know I think Peter Lloyd is here. Peter's the chair of Scottish Refugee Council, and I know we're sharing with the Common Concern Network. Ruth's popped that in. It's moderated by Robert. So yeah, please do sign up, email Robert, get involved in the Common Concern Network if that's what you're interested in. Largely what that network is doing is supporting and sustaining those of us who are engaged in activism. So it's a safe place. So Chris Mercer is one of the people in that group, just dispensing her never-ending wisdom in this area. But also, I can see various people who are, Bob, Thomas, and Ian and Isabel, and just Rosie. I can just see lots of people from the Common Concern Network who are there, and it's been a really meaningful place for us to feel that support and love from the community, and to be able to just share what's happening and intel I might have. So yeah, those are the resources. Right to Remain, it's fab.
Thank you, Alison. And I know Lynn and Karen on Iona, you're bringing these themes into the daily worship there. You're bringing them into the resources in the shop. Lynn is the shop manager. So thank you for all you do to keep these issues to the forefront. And I know Katrina's here too, bringing these concerns into our worship. There's a question from Ron. Have you seen that one, Alison?
Ron, is this about the cuts?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, this is cuts to the overseas aid budget from 0.7 to 0.5 GDP indexed, but it also comes alongside the requirement of the research councils to find the money to cover Horizon, and also taking a 70% cut. So essentially what's happened this week is that universities' capacity to do research has been cut by 70%. And its ability to do research with any low to middle income country through the fund that was set up for us to do development work, particularly of the capacity of universities, intellectuals, schools, and for the sustaining of the sustainable development goals, that has been absolutely eradicated. It is as I'm seeing on the WhatsApp group chat, that is the support group that we've set up for those who are who are part of this. We are looking at probably 60,000 jobs to be lost to this work across the UK, but in particular work that is in other areas, and with pretty much immediate effect. So I resigned very publicly from being the chair of the international committee that is the Committee of Strategic Advisors to the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So one of those, because the government placed what we can only now infer is a gagging order on all civil servants with whom we've had superb relations for at least the 12 years I've been working closely with them, and the 5 years I've been chairing that committee. Suddenly there was an absolute moratorium on any speech with us as scientific advisors and as an advisory committee. And when I realized that we were being basically made responsible and to carry the can for a set of decisions that do not safeguard and do not comply with any of the due diligence, the risk assessments, and the safeguarding protocols we have to put in place for working with vulnerable people overseas, and what the consequences of these cuts will be to the livelihoods of, particularly for me, women and girls in small base communities around the world. There was no way I could do anything other than basically lead a small group of us who made a very public resignation, and that letter is in the press, online, all over the Guardian. My dad said to me, Ron, and you'll really appreciate this, my dad said to me when it was in the Guardian on, and there was a kind of big picture of me after a bizarre photo shoot on University Avenue, surrounded by COVID compliance officers. But my dad said, look, it's only been in the Guardian, Alison, unless it's in the Times, unless it's in my paper, then it won't happen. And he phoned me up on Sunday. He said, not only is it in the Times, it's the Telegraph, so your campaign might win. So yeah, I'm optimistic. I'm not hugely optimistic, but I think we're making inroads, and we understand that the Prime Minister is concerned about the impact that this might now have on the global Britain brand and on the national interest. So we are encouraging him in that thinking, much as it may gall those of us for whom it is the sustaining of communities in the global south and redistribution of resources that is most important.
Thank you.
I was just going to offer Ron a chance to make a response, but we have time for one more question, I think, and William has a question here about falling into the trap of white saviours. William, do you want to ask your question and maybe share why that's a concern for you, if you want to elucidate on it?
Yeah, so I've just asked, how do we avoid falling into the trap of acting as white saviours while doing work with and for the cause of refugees? That there can often be this tendency to come into situations as white people, maybe having never done work with refugees or minority groups before, and assuming that we have the answers, the solutions, and the capabilities to come in almost with a heavy hand and fix it. So just how to deal with that when doing the work.
Yeah, thanks, William. Thanks. I have about 16 PhD students working on areas around this from all over the world, and this is the number one question that they are required to write about by me when they start their work, is to really understand their position within this, to understand and account for your privilege, but also not to let any guilt around that be the driving force, because it leads to all kinds of other pitfalls. And again, it's where the Iona community has been so important to me for this. Because it's about a gospel of forgiveness, and my own team, I mean, particularly Tawana, who wrote the poetry book with me, Gamali, who mastered the audio book for that, who are two researchers who work alongside me from the Global South. They mentor me in this. They will be the first to tell me if I'm falling into this trap. Most of the time, we approach this with humor. And I've found over the years that humor is really vital to change, that we won't change anything without laughter, without humor. And I remember a beautiful poem of Kathy Galloway's talking about, I think she says, I'm not sure I know what resurrection is, but I know it's got something to do with community and the release of laughter into the world. And for me, the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Good Friday, Easter Saturday, Easter Sunday are really important metaphors for this work. So Good Friday is the day where we are fully confronted with the horror of what we have done in the world, and what whiteness has achieved in the world and also not achieved in the world, of paths taken by ancestors and legacies that we live with as a result, and the ways in which we're bound into that, whether we like it or not. As the great late Leith Fisher once said, it sticks to us like glue. We cannot avoid it. And in a way, for me, that's an understanding of that old-fashioned idea of sin. However, we are not bound by that. There is good news. We are released from it. And if we share with one another, and if we talk about it, and if we bring humour to bear, as we do in our accounting disciplines, in the Iona community, around the use of our resources, the use of our resources of money, the use of our resources of carbon, the use of our resources for time. And for me, then also, what am I doing with my white resources? Then things change. And to me, I am regularly accused in academic circles and in public lectures of white privilege, a white stage, and white work. I mean, it's just the easy and usually the lazy accusation. And I then just do homework with people and say, okay, let's tell some stories. Let's just bring this into storytelling. But we also do a lot of work. So usually when I have a keynote lecture to do, often not at night because most of my team are putting their children to bed, but when I have a keynote lecture to do, my colleagues from the Global South do it with me. And we play with the space. So you can see my UNESCO inaugural lecture online, but in that space, we basically let me be interrupted in the Boydor Lecture Theatre. I know some of you were there. It was quite a spectacular, extraordinary, bizarre occasion. But I mean, I started out very normal lecture, you know, here are my slides, here's some theoretical framing. And then lo and behold, suddenly right in the middle, a black woman stands up and she shouts her accusation at me in a language we don't understand. The shock, the palpable shock. You know, every code and taboo has been undone. And of course we were staging this. And then, you know, my colleague Tawana stands up and starts reciting the poem Border Crossing in Togo. But he starts it in Shona. Everyone's shocked, taboo, all those fears, all the things you confront in those moments are there. And then we relax it, we smile, we start to laugh and joke together. Everyone relaxes with us and comes together. We did that work recently at the University of Cambridge at an event hosted with and by the Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge University, the head of UN Development Programme, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, a former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and then me and Gamali doing our tricks. And Gamali stood up in the middle of my lecture, interrupted me and said, "Who do you think you are? You're just a white saviour. Go back to where you came from." And the lecture could have stopped there. It didn't, because what my team feel is vital is that we get beyond the accusation into the forgiveness. And so Gamali then, we laughed together, we joked, we shared the lecture space, he came into it. And at the end, he taught everybody to sing a song in his Ewe mother tongue, and to learn words in Ewe and to sing them with him and to be brought together into unity. And for us, if we miss that, we're not doing our work. All we're doing is holding the bowl of tears. We're not expanding a space for joy. And we're not actually telling the truth about humanity, which is there is no pure place to stand. There's no pure white saviour any more than my team will tell you there's no pure black saviour either. And they will be the first to say that within their countries, the way in which xenophobia and prejudice play themselves out is equally brutal in intent. It may just not have the weaponry and the resourcing at its disposal to create quite the barbarism that they have seen. And that it's very easy if people don't do that work. And I think Walter Wink's books are brilliant examples of that, to become what they hate. Very quickly to become what they hate. And we've seen examples through history of a people who have been oppressed becoming the worst of the oppressors. We see it again and again and again through history, which is why mana aki is so important. Manaki tanga is so important. Why it matters for the long term that the gift we give in hospitality will be repaid in goodness and kindness for generations to come, and that we break those cycles. So long answer to a really important, I mean, absolutely vital question, William. Thanks.
Thank you, William, and thank you, Alison. And on that note, friends, we are going to pause. Well, we're going to stop the formal conversation. I'm going to hang around for a little bit at the end. If anyone wants to hang around in the space, feel free to do so. Alison, there's a question from Janet about resources and books. I guess rather than answer that now, if you do have, if you can easily point me to somewhere, I'll send out a mailing to everybody that's been on this call in the next few days, along with the recording, and I'll send out any other resources that Alison has time to send to me. Is that okay, Janet? I hope that's okay. So it remains for me to say a huge thank you to you, Alison, for being with us. You've given us prayers to pray, hold the bowl of tears, expand the space for joy. I'm not going to forget that. You've reminded us of some of the words and the practices that are at the heart of our community's life and at the heart of humanity. There is goodness at that heart, planted more deeply than all that is wrong. And manaki tanga, let's just bring that close and hear those voices as we travel on from this place, to find more civic spaces where we can forgo the excesses and dig deep into the places where civic space is denied so many. So on this momentous day, go and get a cup of tea, Alison, and thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. And friends, we'll be in touch. Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.